back to our week 1 where we're looking at an introduction to R Studio, and R Studio Cloud. Remember that the cloud is the aspect that we are allowed to collaborate with one another, and it also saves you from downloading R onto your personal computer. So one of the collaboration aspects is that I'll be able to give you templates with code that would include the application assignments for each week. So what you'll notice right now on the screen is the template for the week 1 application. This week isn't so much of a template as it is what the actual assignment is, so you can work through it. I'm going to give you some instructions so that you have a better idea of how to do some of these items. And so we're going to start in File, and I'm going to do a new file. I'm going to do a new Markdown document. So always when you do a new file, you have the opportunity of giving it a title. So I'll say, let's say week 1 instruction. I am the author, and we'll have HTML be the output. And so it always opens with a bunch of generic code, which I don't want because I would like to give you extra information. So I'm going to, if I wanted to change the title to week 1, looking at our Markdown, and you'll notice that it's in green. If I were to delete that last quotation mark, that means that I've done something wrong. So you always want these titles to be in green. If they're not in green, you've done something incorrectly. In the author, you can write your name. In the date, you can write today's date, whatever that might be. You can affect change on the output. You can affect change on if there's a subtitle. You can change the font. You can change the size of the font. So lots that you can do in this YAML header, which is going to ultimately show up on your R Markdown document. But for right now, this is how it is created. It has those 3 dashes as the beginning and the end, so that R knows that those are the pieces of the header. And then you can type generic font. So I can type some regular font that will show up in our Markdown document. The other thing that you can do is use a pound sign and say, I'm going to make a header for the document. If I want to have that be a different size, I could say this header is a different size. So I just right now want to show you what that looks like just from the jump. Like, what is that stuff and how does that translate to the actual Markdown document? So up here, if I click this knit option, essentially what it does is it knits the text like we just typed. It will eventually knit the code that we're going to do, and it knits the header all into one document. So when I knit it, it's going to knit it into the HTML format because that's what we chose. I'm just going to call this example. And you'll notice when it opens up, it has that header. It says week 1, looking at our Markdown, your name, today's date. I can take some regular font that will show up. Header, this is a different size header. So you can see that the size or the number of the pound signs or the number signs change the size of it. If you just type regular text, it just shows up separately. So that's what's happening. It creates that ultimate document that is going to have different aspects to it. I can also add some chunks, and the chunks means chunks of code. Remember, we're working with R language, and so we're going to choose R code, but you can see if you know SQL or Python or those other options, you're able to do that. So one comment, this in the curly brackets with the R, you are able to make some adjustments to how these chunks of code show up. So you could tell it to not run the code at all. You can tell it to hide the actual code and just give you the output of it. You could tell it to not give you errors if it's creating errors. So there's a lot that you can do in that. You can adjust sizes of things, alignments of things, how things end up showing up in your R Markdown. So in here, I also have the opportunity to, let's see, let's code something. Let's call this item weather. And I'm going to assign weather, so that arrow, that faux arrow with my dash and then the arrow pointing back to it, I'm going to make a column where I talk about rain, let's say sleet, snow, let's say sun. And you notice that because I didn't put those quotation marks, that one turned black. I was talking about earlier how the reason that we like this script editing window is because it helps you to know if you've created an error before you actually run the code. So if you want something to be a categorical variable, you need to make sure that it's in those quotes. You also can notice back here at this line 17, it has that red X. That means that I have an error right now, and the error in this very moment is that I don't have the ending quotes, and so it's saying, oops, you forgot something. So now you see I add that quote, and you notice that that black or red X went away. So I'm also going to create another variable called days, and to that I'm going to make up how many days in the last year it rained. So let's say it rained 40 days. Let's say it had some sleet 5 days. It snowed 90 days. It was sunny, let's say 120 days, and it was cloudy 120 days. So I've just created two variables. One is weather, that's a categorical variable, and then days. And then I'm going to create a new item that talks about what should we call it? Let's call it, I don't know what I'm calling it back because for the life of me, I can't think of anything else. So I'm going to call that a data frame, and frame. You notice when you start typing, one of the nice things too about being in this syntax editor is that it gives you prompts. So we call this a data frame, and I'm going to tell it to use the weather and days. Oops, daisies, my capitals is on. And then I'm going to tell it to print Bob. All right, so I can, over here you see run this chunk. I could highlight it and have it run specific things. I can also go up here, and if I have multiple chunks, I can tell it to run multiple chunks. There's also some shortcut keys for being able to run it. I'm just going to run that whole thing. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that it actually does kind of delineate what the weather is. It says that this is a character, and this says DBL. I'm not totally sure what the DBL stands for. Nevertheless, I just created a little table. So there are ways to make these tables nicer. I can load in a library. Let's say I load in the knitter library. So libraries are a way for you to get help with some of the code so you don't have to do it yourself. I always kind of equate it to, you want to make chicken soup, but you don't have the time to make the stock. If you bought the chicken stock or broth to help you make the chicken soup, it's just a way to do it faster. It's not going to taste any different. There's nothing different about it. It's just you've allowed someone else to do that work for you so you can make that chicken soup. Same with coding here in R. There are people who have written libraries, like that broth idea, that saves you time, and you just pull things out of their code that they've already created that will do some of the work for you. So here I can create a table, which is actually called table of Bob. And just one comment, I did this while I was chatting and I didn't talk about it, but the shortcut key for running that is that library, and I already actually ran that, and so that's why it's giving me that error. And so now if I go into the cable function, I did Control and then Enter, and you notice what it does. It gives you a nicer table. Weather, days, it looks a lot better than that bob that we had printed above. So now I want you to notice when we knit, what happens with our HTML document is that it is knitting together both that generic text that we had written earlier, and then it also is knitting together the code that we created. So this code is that little print bob that I had, not super awesome. And then it's going to the next code where we had that cable, and you notice that it prints a much nicer table there. So there are many options for creating nice tables. We will have throughout this semester opportunities where we both read in data and create data. So here we created our own data on the fly while we were in the R Markdown, but we will also, because we're going to be analyzing some COVID data, we'll be pulling that data in from various resources on the internet that will help us to be able to know for our specific states, and then we'll be able to map those items. So this is the initial look at the R Markdown. Very simple. I just want you to get an idea of what it's doing. In the video that talks about your application assignment, I will be having you work through some of the help documents to be able to figure out how to do some items that I didn't show you how to do on your own. So that will be the next one. But for right now, here's some very specific, easy things that you can get started with for our Markdown. Okay, talk soon.